I cleaned the floor while they mocked me at the office party. Years later, they begged me for mercy. Lena wiped the sweat from her brow as she pushed the mop bucket down the hall of the finance firm's headquarters, the rhythmic squeak of the wheels echoing against the polished tile. She had worked here for a little over a year, always arriving before dawn and leaving long after the lights dimmed in the executive suites. It was a job that paid the bills, and Lena never let herself forget how fragile her second chance at stability was. That morning, however, as she sorted the outgoing mail at the front desk, a cream-colored envelope caught her eye. It was thick, formal, and embossed with gold. The firm's New Year's Eve celebration, it read. Her name was on it. She blinked twice. It wasn't a mistake. For a moment, she clutched it to her chest, unsure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. Later that evening, she sat at her small kitchen table, the invitation resting beside her dinner of reheated soup. Part of her wanted to ignore it entirely. What would she wear? Who would she talk to? Still, a quiet hope flickered. Maybe they were starting to see her differently. Maybe showing up would mean something. Her neighbor, an elderly woman who often helped with her dog when Lena worked nights, encouraged her. You should go, she said. You've earned your place just as much as anyone else there. Lena nodded slowly. She didn't want to expect kindness, but she also didn't want to keep living as if she didn't deserve it. By the time the soup had gone cold, she had made up her mind. She would go. The days leading up to the party felt surreal. Lena stayed late at the office, discreetly cleaning the very ballroom that would soon be filled with the city's finest. She took careful note of the decor, the cascading white lilies on every table, the string quartet scheduled to rehearse, the delicate glass sculptures placed by the entrance. It all felt like another world, one where people like her only existed to serve, never to belong. Still, she walked home that night with a purpose. The next morning, she visited a local thrift store. After hours of browsing, she settled on a plain, elegant black dress that fit modestly and a pair of heels that pinched a bit at the toes. Back home, she washed and pressed the dress, hanging it with care on her closet door as if it were a symbol of something larger than clothing. When New Year's Eve arrived, Lena stood before her cracked mirror, steadying her hands as she applied minimal makeup. Her hair, once thick and long, was now short and practical, easier to manage during long shifts. But tonight, she added a simple silver clip, a gift from her mother many years before. She looked older than she remembered. Tired, maybe. But not defeated. The cab ride to the venue was silent, Lena staring out the window, watching as the city lights blurred past like stars. As the car pulled up to the grand building she cleaned every morning, her heart pounded. Guests in shimmering gowns and tailored suits swept past her. She took a deep breath, stepped out, and walked up the steps, into a world that, for one night, she had dared to enter. The atmosphere inside the ballroom was intoxicating, champagne flutes clinked, laughter floated above the string quartet's gentle harmonies, and the smell of luxury hung in the air like perfume. Lena entered quietly, clutching her small handbag and offering polite nods to familiar faces. Yet no one truly saw her. A few turned their heads, furrowed their brows as if struggling to remember where they'd seen her before. A group of junior associates near the entrance did a double take. One whispered something, and the others chuckled. Lena walked past them with her head high, even though a prickling sensation burned at the back of her neck. She found a quiet corner near the refreshments table and stood there, sipping sparkling water, pretending to be absorbed by the decorations. It wasn't long before the comments began. Who invited the cleaning staff? A woman's voice echoed across the room, dripping with amusement. It was Vanessa, wife of one of the firm's top partners. She sauntered toward Lena, flanked by two other women dressed in red and gold. "Is that your work uniform?" she asked, pointing to Lena's dress with faux concern. "Darling, it's so humble." The women laughed, and others nearby glanced over. Lena's face flushed, but she said nothing. Vanessa leaned in, her voice a stage whisper. "Next time, bring your mop. Might as well make yourself useful." The laughter that followed was sharp, slicing through the air. Lena quietly set her glass down and stepped away, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She had hoped for dignity. Instead, she found a spectacle. Lena retreated to the coatroom, locking the door behind her and sitting on a bench, her head bowed. Her cheeks burned as if Vanessa's words had branded her skin. All she had wanted was to feel like she mattered, like her work wasn't invisible, like she could reclaim some piece of the identity she had lost. But the party had become a twisted reminder of her place in their world, beneath them. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, clenching her fists in her lap. Outside the door, she could still hear the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses. Her moment of peace shattered when someone banged on the door, shouting, "Is this a janitor's break room now?" She stood, straightened her dress, and opened the door. A group of younger analysts stood there, smirking. One of them held out a crumpled napkin. "Miss, we've got a spill near the dessert table." More laughter. Lena stared at them, her jaw tight. She took a step forward, lifted her chin, and said quietly, "I don't work tonight." But they didn't hear her. Or they didn't care. As she walked away, the memory of her father's words echoed in her mind, "Never let them define your worth." She walked out of the ballroom, down the staircase she once polished every morning, and into the cold air of the city. The cab driver didn't say anything when he saw her red eyes in the mirror. That night, she sat in her tiny apartment, dress hung over a chair, and made a decision that would change everything. In the weeks that followed, Lena kept her head down. She resumed her duties, cleaning the same halls where people now avoided her gaze. The party had made her both visible and untouchable, a curiosity, a joke, a ghost. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. She caught snippets in the break rooms, smirks from assistants, even a few knowing glances from supervisors who had watched but said nothing that night. The worst came one morning when she found a stack of napkins at her locker, folded neatly, with a note that read, "For your next party outfit." Her hands trembled as she read it. She placed them in the trash without a word. It wasn't rage she felt, it was clarity. She had spent too long shrinking herself, trying not to be seen so she wouldn't be mocked. But invisibility hadn't protected her. Now she realized the only way forward was through their laughter, their arrogance, their ignorance. That night, Lena didn't cry. She pulled out her laptop, brushed off an old resume file, and opened her notes from a business course she had taken years ago. Then she clicked on a bookmarked folder titled Business Plan, Draft. It was dusty and half-finished, just like the life she had been too afraid to return to. But now, the fear had turned into something else. A simmering, steady determination. She wasn't done, not yet. And this time, no one would see her coming. Lena had almost forgotten about the business plan she wrote in her early 20s. Back then, she had dreams of launching a consulting service for small, ethical startups, companies that couldn't afford the big players but needed strategic support. Life had derailed those dreams when her mother fell ill and she lost her savings to medical bills. What remained of her ambition had been buried under cleaning shifts and mounting responsibilities. Yet that night, hunched over her laptop in her dimly lit apartment, she began rereading every note, every bullet point. Her younger self had been optimistic, detailed, and sharp. That version of Lena wasn't gone, just dormant. The following week, Lena began to wake up earlier, not to clean, but to study. She watched online lectures before work, brushing up on market analysis and client acquisition strategies. She started rewriting her proposal, segmenting services into manageable packages and quietly offering them on online forums for freelancers. Her first email inquiry came from a struggling wellness startup in Vancouver. They had seen her comment on a business thread and asked if she'd be willing to advise them for a small fee. Lena accepted, and although the pay was modest, the feeling of being seen for her intellect again was priceless. She hadn't felt that spark in years. At the office, nothing had changed. Lena was still the janitor. She scrubbed conference rooms, emptied trash bins, and avoided eye contact. But inside, she was a woman on a mission. Each night after work, she returned to her laptop, responding to client emails, running analytics, and offering solutions. Word of mouth began to build. A bakery owner in Seattle needed help restructuring after a failed expansion. A single mom in Atlanta was launching an e-commerce brand. Lena advised them both. Each client strengthened her confidence, each success built a brick in her foundation. Still, she told no one, not even her neighbor, about what she was building. Despite her growing workload, Lena didn't quit her day job. Not yet. It wasn't pride holding her there, it was calculation. She knew what it was like to lose everything overnight. The job gave her stability while her side business grew in silence. In the break room, she overheard employees joking about the mop lady again. They had no idea she had already helped 5 small businesses increase their profits. They had no idea she was weeks away from registering her own company. Sometimes she smiled at their comments, not out of bitterness, but because she finally knew something they didn't: her future didn't belong to them anymore. By month 3, Lena had a small but steady stream of clients. She built a simple website using a free platform, showcasing anonymous case studies and offering free consultations. She chose a name that sounded sleek but neutral: Slate Point Advisory. Her clients didn't know she worked full-time cleaning an office. They didn't ask. They only saw results. On her days off, she rented a desk at a co-working space downtown, feeling the hum of ambition and possibility all around her. Sitting among designers, coders, and dreamers reminded her of who she used to be. But now, she was becoming someone new. At work, she remained invisible. The office continued to treat her as a fixture. She heard executives laugh about failed pitches, boasting about yachts and bonus packages, while she quietly noted their mistakes. Lena had once feared she wasn't cut out for corporate strategy. Now she saw clearly, many of them weren't either. They had power, but not insight. They had money, but not vision. Her advantage was that she had lived through failure, and she understood how to rebuild. Slowly, she gathered testimonials, wrote guest posts under a pen name, and even landed a feature in a niche startup blog. Still, no one at her firm suspected a thing. The message arrived on a Tuesday evening. Lena had just finished organizing cleaning supplies when her phone buzzed. It was an email, short and polite, from a boutique eco-brand based in Toronto. They had read her article about sustainable supply chains and wanted to know if she'd be open to a consultation. The founder, a woman named Isla, seemed earnest and driven. Lena agreed, setting up a video call that weekend. What started as a quick consult turned into a 4-month contract. Lena overhauled their strategy, connected them with better vendors, and helped them double their profit margins in a single quarter. Isla was thrilled. She introduced Lena to 3 other founders at a business retreat, all of whom were desperate for guidance. Suddenly, Lena was in demand. She worked non-stop, using weekends and late nights to juggle multiple projects. She stopped feeling exhausted and started feeling energized. The momentum had shifted. She wasn't scraping by anymore, she was climbing. She still wore the janitor's uniform each day, but beneath it was a woman no one at the firm recognized anymore. When the company announced a new round of layoffs, some whispered Lena's name as a target. She didn't flinch. She already knew she was leaving on her own terms. One rainy Friday, Lena printed her resignation letter and folded it neatly into a plain envelope. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from release. She had outgrown the place that never made room for her. She handed the letter to HR without a word, her posture steady. The director barely looked at her, muttering something about finally replacing the part-time help. That was fine. She didn't expect applause. That evening, she walked home in the rain without an umbrella, smiling as the water soaked her clothes. For the first time in years, she felt free, not just from a job, but from invisibility. Her final day was unceremonious. No farewell party, no speech. Vanessa passed her in the hallway without a glance. The same young analysts who had mocked her months ago didn't even notice she was leaving. Lena walked out quietly, carrying a box with nothing but her cleaning badge and a notepad filled with ideas. She didn't look back. The next morning, she updated her LinkedIn profile, founder and principal consultant, Slate Point Advisory. She wasn't pretending anymore. This was who she was now. And soon, the world that once laughed at her would know it too. Lena's new daily rhythm was nothing like before. She woke up without an alarm, brewed her coffee slowly, and checked her client emails with a sense of calm purpose. Her work now came from recommendation chains, not cold pitching. Startup founders appreciated her clarity, her directness, her lack of corporate fluff. She spent her mornings analyzing growth funnels and building pitch decks, her afternoons in virtual strategy calls, and her evenings planning Slate Point's expansion. From the outside, it looked like she had vanished. But really, she had just entered a life where she didn't have to prove herself constantly. Still, she kept a low profile. She didn't post selfies or announce her success. She wanted the work to speak first. Even her neighbor only knew she was doing consulting now, though she had no idea what that meant. But Lena liked the anonymity. It gave her freedom. She rented a new office, small but private, and slowly hired 2 remote assistants. She also reconnected with a former college classmate who had become a financial advisor, and together they started planning long-term investment strategies. Lena wasn't chasing validation. She was building legacy, and she knew it would outlast any applause. Meanwhile, back at the firm she had left, whispers of decline had started circulating. Lena's former employer had lost 2 key clients in a single quarter, and there were rumors of poor leadership behind closed doors. Internal friction mounted as the board demanded answers. Employees who had once walked the halls with inflated confidence now mumbled in the break room about the firm being out of touch and too top-heavy. At the center of it all was Vanessa's husband, Charles, an executive who had long dismissed those beneath him, including Lena. He insisted things would stabilize, but his desperation seeped through every announcement. Vanessa, on the other hand, was more focused on appearances. She continued attending galas and charity events, posting glossy photos online. But even she couldn't ignore the growing tension in their home. Her husband's stress was affecting his sleep, and one evening she overheard him on the phone discussing a potential merger to save face. She interrupted him, asking bluntly if the firm was in trouble. "It's manageable," he said with a shaky voice. But Vanessa knew better. She had spent years judging people by their clothing and job titles. Now, the foundation under her feet was cracking, and there was no one left to look down on. 2 senior executives handed in their resignations within a week of each other. Internally, panic spread like wildfire. Charles tried to mask the damage by announcing a new strategic partnership initiative, but most employees saw it for what it was, a scramble. Lena, now 3 months removed from the firm, received a message from a former colleague she had once shared a silent elevator ride with countless times. "Are you doing consulting work?" it read. "We might need outside help, urgently." Lena read the message twice, amused by the irony. She replied politely, asking for more details, already suspecting where it would lead. The following day, she received a formal inquiry through SlatePoint's website, this time signed by one of the firm's board members. The company was losing credibility with clients. A recent audit had exposed internal inefficiencies, and investor confidence was dropping. They were exploring external consultants for a potential turnaround. Lena leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled under her chin. It wasn't just about being asked for help. It was the realization that the same institution that had discarded her was now reaching for the hand it once slapped away. She didn't respond right away. Some things were worth letting simmer. Lena eventually scheduled a video meeting with 2 members of the board. She kept the call formal, her background a clean, minimalist office wall with her logo discreet in the corner. Her tone was calm, professional, and controlled. She asked sharp questions about internal reporting structures, turnover rates, client retention data. The board members answered with polite discomfort. They didn't mention her past with the firm. They didn't dare. After an hour, they asked if she'd be willing to come in for an in-person review session with senior staff. Lena paused, then agreed. She would return, but this time on her terms. On the day of the visit, Lena arrived in a charcoal gray pantsuit, hair sleek, laptop in hand. No badge was needed. A receptionist greeted her with respect, though there was a flicker of confusion behind the smile. As she walked past glass-walled conference rooms, a few employees glanced up, doing double takes. Someone whispered her name. In the elevator, a former analyst stared at her, slack-jawed, as if he had seen a ghost wearing power heels. Lena stood tall, silent, letting the moment breathe. The higher she rose, the more the air cleared, and the more obvious it became just how far she'd come. The office looked the same, but Lena felt like she was stepping onto a different planet. Gone were the mop and cleaning cart. Gone was the weight in her chest. In the executive boardroom, the firm's leaders sat waiting, many of whom had once laughed in her direction or dismissed her with sideways glances. Charles cleared his throat and offered a nervous smile, pretending not to remember her. "We're excited to hear your thoughts," he said. Lena nodded without emotion. "I'll begin with an assessment," she replied. Her voice didn't tremble. She was no longer the one being assessed. Over the next 90 minutes, Lena dismantled their assumptions. She laid out inefficiencies, flawed client pipelines, outdated operations, all without raising her voice. Her analysis was surgical. A few executives squirmed in their chairs. Vanessa, who had apparently been added to the leadership team, entered late and froze when she saw Lena at the head of the table. "Have we met before?" she asked, brows furrowed. Lena smiled coolly and extended a hand. "Yes. But I doubt you remember." Vanessa's color drained slightly. Lena turned back to the screen. She wasn't here to settle a score. She was here to lead a transformation, and she would. Later that week, Lena received an official request from the same firm, now practically begging, for a full proposal. They needed a turnaround plan within 30 days and were willing to pay a significant premium. But what made her pause was the signature at the bottom of the request, Vanessa. Apparently, after years of floating through events as an executive's wife, Vanessa had finally been given a title and responsibility, more likely out of desperation than merit. Lena chuckled quietly. The same woman who once asked if she had worn her uniform to a party was now signing proposals with a trembling hand. Rather than decline outright, Lena asked for clarification on decision-making authority. She made it clear she would only proceed if she had full operational autonomy for the duration of her contract. The board agreed instantly. Vanessa would be required to work alongside her under Lena's terms. That night, Lena took a walk through her neighborhood park. She thought of her father, the man who told her not to let others define her. She had imagined many kinds of victories over the years, but none felt quite like this. She wasn't just being acknowledged, she was being trusted with power, and that was louder than any apology. The next day, Lena met with the board to finalize terms. She sat at the end of the long table, hands steady, notes prepared. Across from her, Charles tried to maintain composure, while Vanessa sat uncharacteristically quiet. Lena began by presenting her fee structure, higher than usual, but appropriate for the scale and urgency of the project. One board member winced. Charles glanced at Vanessa, who looked down at her notes. No one pushed back. The firm needed her more than they were willing to admit out loud. When the conversation shifted to leadership accountability, Lena paused. "If we do this," she said, "there's no halfway. I'll need unrestricted access to internal systems, meetings, and staff evaluations." Vanessa blinked, unsure how to respond. Charles tried to regain control. "That might create tension," he said with a forced smile. "It already exists," Lena replied. "I'm not here to manage egos, I'm here to rescue your brand." The silence that followed was thick. Lena folded her papers, stood, and added, "I'll give you until tomorrow. If you're not comfortable, I walk." And then she left, heels clicking like punctuation. By Monday, the firm had sent back the signed agreement. Lena returned, not as staff, but as lead consultant. She entered the weekly executive meeting after Charles nervously announced, "A new consultant will join us today." The room went still when she walked in. People who had once avoided eye contact now looked down, awkward and unsure. Lena greeted each person with polite restraint. She saw familiar faces, men who once talked over her, women who used to ignore her entirely, now leaning forward, eager to understand how she would fix everything. Vanessa attempted to break the ice with a light comment. "It's funny how life brings us back together, isn't it?" Lena looked at her calmly. "Some of us never left. We were just never seen." The room fell silent. Charles attempted to move on, but the air had already shifted. Lena began her session, outlining a 90-day plan with deadlines, restructures, and reassignments. She made it clear, results would require discomfort. And this time, no one dared to challenge her authority. She wasn't here to ask for approval. She was here to lead. Within the first 2 weeks, Lena had reorganized internal communication channels, introduced new accountability metrics, and launched anonymous employee feedback tools. The staff responded instantly, many of them relieved to finally have someone in charge who listened and understood real problems. Productivity rose, and client retention stabilized. Lena made rounds, sitting in on departments she once silently cleaned. Some of the junior employees recognized her and looked away in shame. She said nothing. Her presence alone was enough. Vanessa struggled. Having to report to someone she had publicly mocked was humiliating, and Lena knew it. But she also saw something new in Vanessa, an edge of restraint. Perhaps it was self-preservation, or maybe it was the beginning of understanding. Either way, Lena treated her no differently than anyone else. She gave clear instructions, fair deadlines, and no favoritism. By the end of the month, Vanessa was following Lena's directives without question. Respect, Lena realized, was louder than revenge. And nothing was more powerful than quiet transformation in full view. At the end of the first month, Charles invited Lena to a private debrief over coffee in the executive lounge. He was sweating before the espresso even arrived. "You've been effective," he said, avoiding her eyes. "I just don't understand why you never told us who you were. What you were capable of." Lena tilted her head, the corners of her mouth almost forming a smile. "You never asked," she said. "You looked at a title, not a person. That's your culture. I was part of it. Invisible and essential." Charles looked genuinely remorseful, but Lena didn't need his guilt. She needed the space to finish what she'd started. "People don't stay small because they lack potential," she continued. "They stay small because someone in your chair refuses to see them." She stood and gathered her notes. "The difference now is that I don't need to be seen to lead." She walked out without waiting for a response. Outside the lounge, an assistant who once giggled behind her back stood up and whispered, "Ms. Hart, your car is ready." Lena nodded, her presence now unmistakably felt. Lena returned to her office later that day and reviewed the second phase proposal draft. The firm now wanted her input on long-term leadership restructuring and brand rehabilitation. She smiled at the irony. They were inviting her to rebuild the very leadership ladder she was once locked out of. She drafted a document that was firm and unapologetic. It included complete independence in team selection, veto power on key hires, and mandatory leadership coaching for all executives, Vanessa and Charles included. Her terms were non-negotiable. When the board read the proposal, silence filled the room. One member finally asked, "Aren't these demands excessive?" Lena didn't flinch. "No. They're necessary. You asked me to restore trust. That starts with a new foundation, not patchwork." Vanessa shifted in her seat, clearly rattled, but no longer resistant. The board reluctantly agreed. Lena watched them sign, one by one, realizing they weren't just agreeing to a contract, they were surrendering the illusion of superiority they'd clung to for years. Vanessa called a last-minute meeting to discuss PR strategy. Lena arrived on time, laptop in hand, ready to listen. The moment she sat, Vanessa launched into a rehearsed speech about controlling the narrative, shifting public focus, and using positive optics. Lena allowed her to finish before speaking. "The truth doesn't need optics," she said. "It needs change. Anything less is lipstick on a sinking ship." The room fell silent. Even Charles said nothing. Lena had become the pulse of the company, and everyone knew it. As the meeting ended, one junior executive, young, clearly nervous, approached Lena and said softly, "I remember you. From the gala. I laughed with the others." "I'm sorry." Lena looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. She didn't dwell on it. Apologies weren't owed, they were chosen. And the fact that they were now surfacing said more than any polished company statement ever could. Slowly, accountability was echoing through the halls, reaching places it never had before. The firm hosted a quarterly review event, smaller than the New Year's Gala but just as symbolic. The venue was the same. The chandeliers, the marble, even the arrangement of the tables, all identical. Lena stood at the back as people gathered, sipping wine and chatting. She could still hear the laughter from that night years ago, see the dismissive looks, the napkin thrown at her feet. But now, they looked at her with hesitation, with reverence, with respect. The reversal wasn't loud, it was piercing in its silence. Vanessa gave a short speech, carefully worded and empty of substance. When it ended, the crowd turned to Lena, expecting her to say something. She walked to the microphone slowly, her posture calm. 3 years ago, she began, I was here. Not as a guest, but as a reminder of who wasn't welcome. The room froze. She continued. Back then, you asked me to clean your mess. Today, you've asked me to fix your future. I've accepted both roles. But never forget the difference. Applause came, not forced, not polite. Genuine. That night, Charles approached Lena outside on the balcony. You could have humiliated us, he said quietly. No one would have blamed you. Lena looked out at the city lights. Humiliation is easy. Transformation is harder. But it lasts longer. He nodded, understanding for the first time that she wasn't after revenge, she was after evolution. Lena didn't want anyone ruined. She wanted them better. And the only path to that was through reflection, honesty, and uncomfortable growth. Inside, Vanessa watched them through the glass. For a moment, her face softened, not from defeat, but from recognition. She walked over, joining them in the cool night air. I don't know how to fix who I've been, she said, voice low. Lena replied without hesitation. Start by listening to the people you never noticed before. Vanessa nodded. It wasn't redemption yet. But it was a beginning. Lena had no interest in playing queen over ashes. She wanted to build something worth standing in. News of the firm's transformation began to ripple through the industry. Articles framed it as a stunning cultural shift led by an unexpected strategist. Lena's name started appearing in interviews and keynote panels. Her photo was finally attached to her voice. She spoke calmly, with a quiet authority that made people lean in. Slate Point advisory grew faster than she had imagined. Former clients referred her to international partners. Universities asked her to guest lecture. Still, she chose her projects carefully, never chasing the spotlight. One evening, she received a handwritten letter from an intern at the firm. The girl wrote, "You're the reason I believe people like me can belong in rooms like that. Thank you for showing us we don't have to become someone else to be respected." Lena folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, next to her father's watch. That night, she closed her laptop early, poured a glass of tea, and sat quietly on her balcony. She didn't need noise. She had peace. And that was the truest form of success she had ever known. Days after the quarterly event, Lena received an envelope at her office without a return address. Inside was a carefully folded letter written in elegant, slanted handwriting. As she read it, she instantly recognized the voice. It was Vanessa's. The tone was strained but earnest. Vanessa acknowledged her arrogance, her cruelty, and her blind comfort in the hierarchy she had once worshipped. I used to think I was powerful because people feared or envied me. But I see now that true power comes from the ability to lift others, not keep them beneath you, the letter said. Lena read the message twice, slowly. She didn't feel satisfaction, only a sense of closure. Vanessa hadn't made excuses, and she hadn't asked for forgiveness. She had simply admitted the truth. Lena placed the letter in a small box on her shelf labeled Past Lives. It sat beside her janitor's badge and the thrifted silver hair clip she wore that infamous night. These weren't souvenirs of shame. They were reminders, chapters of a story that still belonged to her, even if she'd rewritten the ending. Months later, the firm invited Lena to attend its rebranded anniversary gala, not as a guest of obligation, but as its keynote speaker. The invitation was crisp, embossed, and this time, addressed with sincerity. Lena considered declining, unsure if returning to that room again was necessary. But something told her it was. Not for them, for herself. She accepted. On the night of the event, she wore a deep emerald dress that matched the self-assurance she now carried without effort. When she walked through the doors, the room paused. This time, it wasn't out of ridicule, it was respect. Old employees stood. New ones whispered. Charles and Vanessa approached her at the entrance, both extending their hands. She shook them with grace. No bitterness lingered. No smugness either. Only the presence of someone who had been overlooked for too long and had now stepped into her place fully. As she moved through the crowd, people made room for her, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. When it was time for her speech, the lights dimmed and silence fell. She didn't need notes. She carried the story in her bones. Lena stood before a crowd that once turned its back on her. 3 years ago, I was asked to leave a party in this room, she began, her voice steady. Not with words, but with laughter, with whispers, with eyes that refused to see me. Tonight, I stand here not to remind you of who I was, but to show you who I've become. A hush fell over the audience. No one moved. No one blinked. Her words were simple, but they rang with the weight of truth that could not be denied. She spoke about growth, about grace, about the dignity in honest work. She reminded them that talent can wear a suit or a uniform. The future of any company, she said, does not lie in the people with titles, but in the people whose value has never been measured. When she finished, there was no polite applause. It erupted into a standing ovation. And yet, Lena didn't smile for the crowd. She smiled inwardly, for the girl who once swept this very floor with her head down, never knowing she'd someday stand at the front of it. After the gala, Lena stayed behind to help the interns carry equipment. An older staff member chuckled softly and said, "You're too important for this now." Lena looked at her and replied, "No one's too important to help." She had no interest in forgetting where she came from. She still believed that humility wasn't weakness, it was grounding. Later that week, she offered to mentor a group of first-generation college graduates entering the workforce. She didn't want to just rise alone, she wanted to leave doors open behind her. In her sessions, she spoke not just about business models and leadership, but about resilience. People will underestimate you, she told them. They'll try to shrink you. Let them. That's how you find the strength to expand beyond their reach. One of the students asked how she handled humiliation without lashing back. Lena smiled and answered, because humiliation only lasts a moment. But who you become afterward, that lasts forever. And in that quiet moment, they understood. Power wasn't loud. It was rooted, calm, unshakable. One morning, years after her last day as a janitor, Lena passed by the building where it all began. Slate Point had just opened a new satellite office across the street. She paused outside the glass tower, watching a new cleaning staff member mop the entry floor. People walked past him without a glance, just as they once did with her. Lena stepped inside, greeted him with a warm smile, and handed him a bottled water. "Thank you for keeping this place standing," she said. His face lit up with a smile of surprise and gratitude. As she walked away, she didn't feel nostalgic, she felt grateful. Everything had come full circle. Her story wasn't one of revenge. It was one of reclamation. She had taken every insult, every slight, every dismissal, and turned them into bricks. Not to build a wall, but a foundation. A life defined not by how low she started, but by how far she chose to rise. And in that choice, Lena had rewritten not just her story, but the meaning of success itself.